This film was completed before the President of the United States pulled the country out of the Paris climate agreements. You had some conversations with him before that happened. What gives you some optimism that the president and his cabinet, which is filled with climate change deniers, can somehow do something positive to turn the tide?
I tried hard to convince Donald Trump before the inauguration and after he got to the White House to come to his senses on the Paris Agreement. And I actually thought there was reason to hope after my exchanges with him that he would, but I was wrong. The rogues gallery of climate deniers around him, I think, stopped that. So we're just going to have to work around him. And the good news is that there's a law of physics that sometimes works in politics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And out in the country right now, there is a huge reaction to what he's doing. And the climate movement has more momentum and enthusiasm and passion now than I've ever seen. And what Bonni and John have done with this movie, my dearest hope is that people will see it, and the more people who do, the more the movement will gain momentum. So I'm very optimistic. I think we're going to win this. And after he pulled out of Paris, I was fearful that other countries might use that as an excuse to do the same, but instead, the entire rest of the world redoubled its commitment to the Paris Agreement as if to say, we'll show you, Donald Trump. And here in the U.S., governors and mayors and business leaders stepped up to fill the gap and said we're still in. And by the way, your governor, Jerry Brown, is a real hero on this. And now it looks like the U.S. has a real chance of meeting the commitments in spite of Donald Trump.
Jeff, I want to ask about participants' view in this position in all of this, because you obviously worked on the original film. Why did you feel it was time, 11 years later, to come back and revisit what David Guggenheim had started with An Inconvenient Truth?
Well, first off, a big thank you to all of you here tonight coming out for this film. The original film was built on the shoulders of all of those in the Academy and all of those who did An Inconvenient Truth in the first place, like Davis Guggenheim, who directed the film. And all through the years, Davis, along with our producers, Laurie David and Lawrence Bender and Scott Burns and others, and Leslie Chilcup, we would talk, is now a time to come back and tell the world what has happened. Because before the first film came out, Americans didn't care so much about climate change, and a couple of years after it came out, Americans cared a lot. The recession hit, the deniers got in gear, and is that really the time to come back and say what happened? Well, we tried in different ways. Finally, in April of 2015, Al had come to my office, a participant, and we were sitting together and saying, Al, is now the time for a sequel? And Al said, it's been 10 years. Al very wisely said, this is a 10-year anniversary, and this movie, this film, had such a touch point in the world, and I'd like to get that message out to the people that we talked to then. What the scientists said, what the people said, what the results were, and whether we were right, whether we were not right, what happened, and also, is there a new story to tell? And I said, I agree completely. And there's this whole new world of clean tech that you saw in the film. I work in my day job much of the time in the clean tech, and so I see that these things are coming. We're on the precipice of a new generation of clean energy for everyone. So Al and I said, you know what, now's the time to make the film, and I just have one promise, one ask, really. Let's not make a political film. It's about what happened in climate and the clean tech revolution. And remember, we shot most of this prior to the U.S. election, so all I can say is politics happens, but the clean tech revolution is upon us, and Al has been leading us all the way through.
John and Bonni, how did you approach this as a film that would both extend the conversation that was started 11 years ago with the first film and make a new conversation happen as well? What was the continuation, and what was the new thought that you brought to the making of your film?
You want me to start? Well, of course, we were, so honored to get this call from Diane Wireman, the head of Jeff's documentary department at Participant. We went to Nashville in July a couple years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. We sat down with Al, and he was gracious enough to give us the 10-hour version of his slideshow.
I'll be showing that later.
And Bonni and I, we had worked on a climate film called The Island President about 4 or 5 years ago. And so we felt like we knew kind of the basics, but we really learned a lot that day. And one thing, we learned a lot, as you just saw, about just how bad things have gotten, and of course how much hope there is in the sustainability markets now. But we also just felt Al's energy, and we kind of looked at each other and we thought, if we could do a verite film, a cinema verite film, where we were kind of flies on the wall, that sort of harkens back to, you know, the way documentaries were done back in the day, which is of course a format that we love to work in. We thought if we could capture that, and we looked at Al's schedule for the year, and we thought, oh God, the Paris Climate Accords is happening later this year. That seems pretty interesting. And we started thinking in those terms, in terms of sort of building a documentary screenplay over the course of the next 18 months.
Bonni, how would you say that you cast the planet in this film, and how important was it to get citizen journalists to be involved, much the way that they're reporting on what's happening in Syria, to document what's happening around the world?
So Planet Earth was really, obviously, the major character in this film, and it was incredibly important to us to make sure that the cinematography reflected that whenever you see something of Earth, it is in all its majestic beauty to start out with, but often, like you see in Greenland, you're sort of, you know, you're experiencing one of the wonders of the world, but then all of a sudden as we pull up, and John is also the cinematographer of this film, and we had some drones in Greenland that kind of lifted up, and you started to see the cracks in the ice and kind of the virus that is taking over this wonder of the world. So we looked for ways cinematically to show that dissonance. That was very important to us. And another key character in the film was all the user-generated video from citizens around the world who are experiencing climate disasters. A very good example of this would be when we did the research for the terrible storm that hit Tacloban in the Philippines, and had a picture of that. And Richard was responsible for a huge amount of this research and collection, but we wanted to see what kind of user-generated videos we could find on the internet of people who had been in the middle of the storm trying to save people. In fact, the mayor of Tacloban, that video that you see where he's pushing through the ceiling to find dry ground, that was his. He was taking it in the moment. So people around the world are feeling this. It's emotional for them. And the small acts of citizen journalism are actually collectively having one voice that we can all respond to.
Richard, you accompany these filmmakers to Paris, and part of the nature of the story is we're going to follow the vice president around. And the vice president is meeting with some very interesting and high-profile people. So you've got your camera crew, and then there's maybe a head of state that wanders into the frame. What are the conversations that you're having in real time to make sure that your cameras are getting where the vice president is getting, and you're getting access to those conversations?
I guess part of my job was to go into the men's room and to see what leaders were going to be coming out of the men. But no, we were in Paris. There's a kind of inner sanctum that we had a pass to get into, and it was amazing to see, you know, Ban Ki-moon walk by and President Hollande walk by, and you know, obviously the former vice president is completely comfortable with these people, and they love to see him. And it wasn't hard to necessarily arrange these meetings. I mean, you see in the film, Justin Trudeau comes up and introduces himself as if Mr. Gore doesn't know who he is, and it was like that time and time again. One of the moments that I thought was particularly funny, it didn't have to do necessarily with leaders, was he would be mobbed constantly. And I remember you saying, these are my peeps, it's my demo. And there were, everywhere we went, people wanted to take selfies, and it made you realize that the United States is so unique in terms of this polarization over the climate, that around the world there seems to be much more consensus that we need to do something about it. And but we were making our way through a hallway, and got to be so many people that former vice president jumped into the Swedish office, I think, and they were surprised to see you. What is he doing in here? And quickly the crowd dissipated, and we reemerged into the hallway.
What can people do leaving this theater? What can they do? Give them 5 things that's going to help turn the tide.
Use your voice, use your vote, use your choices in life. Your voice is important to win the conversations about climate. These other revolutions that were referred to in the movie were won in conversations before the actual laws changed. If somebody had told me even 5 years ago that in the year 2017, gay marriage would be legal in all 50 states and accepted, honored, celebrated by more than 2/3 of the American people, I would have said, I sure hope so, but that seems impossible. But it happened because people created a social revolution in consciousness and awareness. So use your voice, including on social media. And using your vote also means communicating with your elected officials and the candidates who approach you. When enough people say passionately, this is important to you, it changes. Use your choices in life. You've made such choices. A new electric car just came out for $35,000 yesterday. There are companies in California who will put solar panels all over your roof for free, and your bills will go down 20% the next day. The choices are becoming available now, and when you make the right ones, that sends a powerful message to business and industry. And for those of you who like this movie, please use word of mouth to recommend it to others, because the more people who see this, the more this movement will gain momentum.